Today's shiur will begin at the bottom line of Daf Chof Omid Beis, the line at which the Gemara opens following the Mishnah. In the Mishnah that we learned at the conclusion of our previous shiur, we were dealing with verification of signatures in a document, and the verification done by the signers themselves. We noticed a machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim in a case where each signer, the two witnesses that are required, each one recognized his own signature but did not recognize the fellow signer's signature as well. So you have a situation that we saw in the Mishnah where witness A says, this is my signature. He authenticates it as his signature. Witness B says regarding the second signature, yes, this is my signature. But each one is not commenting about the other one's signature. In a case like that, Rebbe said, since we don't have two witnesses per signature, you have to find an outsider who recognizes both the signatures. Let's say at least one person from the outside that happens to recognize both signatures, and you would thereby be able to have two people per signature, the signer himself plus that outsider. According to the Chachamim, you don't need to do that. It's enough to have each person say, this is my signature. With that in mind, we now continue with the Gemara's analysis. When you look into this, L'divrei Rebbe, according to Rebbe, the testimony of these witnesses, Al-Ksav Yodon Heim Me'idim, the testimony concerns the actual signature. Therefore, you need to have two testimonies per signature. L'divrei Chachamim, Al-Mona Shebishtar Heim Me'idim. According to the Chachamim, the testimony concerns the content of the document. And as far as the content of the document is concerned, when each witness says, this is my signature, and the other one says, this is my signature, you've got two witnesses on the document. So the Chachamim's perception is that the testimony here is testifying concerning the information in the document. The Gemara treats it in a terse form. It simply says Mona Shebishtar. The literally Mona is 100. The money that is referred to in the shtar, or if you will, if it's a loan document, the witnesses are testifying that the loan had taken place. Rebbe, on the other hand, saying that the testimony being offered here is purely, we'll say, signature-centered. The Gemara says, Pshita, this analysis that the Gemara is saying is quite obvious. So it's simple. What is there any need to point this out for? The Gemara answers, but notice we have a long answer. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, Eidim haboyim lohayid al chsimas yidem shebishtar. Witnesses that come to authenticate their signatures in a document. L'Rebbe, according to Rebbe, al ksav yodon heim idim. Their testimony is focused on the signatures. L'chachamim al mona shebishtar heim idim. According to Chachamim, when they come to authenticate the signatures, they are in effect testifying about the content of the document. The Gemara now has to answer the question of Pshita, is this not obvious? The Gemara continues, Mahu detema l'Rebbe sfuke mesafkale I al ksav yodam heimeidim oy al mona shebishtar heimeidim. Without the Gemara stating what appeared to be obvious, there would have been room left for me to think that Rebbe is actually an opinion of doubt. He himself has a doubt. Is the testimony concerning their signatures, that's Ksav Yodam, or possibly the testimony concerns the content of the document? So that Rebbe in the Mishnah, when he says, you've got to bring in an outsider, he is insisting on that from a standpoint of doubt. If it was certain to Rebbe that Almona Shebishtarhe Me'idim, there would be no need for the outsider, because once you've got two witnesses, each one recognizing their own signature, so in the whole picture, sum total, I have two witnesses here, and they would be qualified to testify concerning the content of the document or the event that is reported therein. But Rebbe doesn't say that that's enough. He's insisting that you bring an outsider in order to have two witnesses per signature. Is this insistence on Rebbe from a standpoint of doubt or something else? So the Gemara says that without the Gemara stating unequivocally that Rebbe is necessitating testimony of two witnesses per signature, I now know that Rebbe is not speaking from the standpoint of doubt. V'nafkamina, the difference between saying that Rebbe represents a position of doubt versus a position of certainty, the nafkamina, the practical difference would be heichod demis chad minayu, if one of the two signers died. So he's not around to authenticate his own signature. In a case like that, leboi shnayim min hashuk lahoyed olav, regarding that the signature of the deceased witness, in a case like that, I would require two outsiders, two witnesses from the shuk to come and testify about that signature. In other words, I will not rely on the signer himself. That is the other signer regarding that second signature. The im kain, if I don't have two people from the outside concerning the deceased's signature, if I would have only one outsider, let us say, concerning the deceased signature, and the living person, the living witness, testify as well concerning the deceased signature, you will then create a situation, kanofik nechiriva de mamoina apuma dechad sada. I have 3/4 of the amount involved in this case being based on the testimony of one witness. The translation of the Gemara of kanofik nechi riva de mamona. Nechi means less, a riva, a quarter of the money. That means 1/4 less than 100%. Meaning you'd have 75% of the money being testified by one witness. V'hocha l'chumra, v'hocha l'chumra. And as a result of this element of doubt, we find that Rebbe will take the stringent standpoint whether the witnesses are not dead, insisting on an outsider to come in to serve as a witness for each signature along with the signer himself. And in the case that the signer is dead, he'll insist on having two witnesses to testify concerning the deceased's signature. Komash Malon de Rebbe Mifshad Pshitale. We are hereby informed that according to Rebbe, it is a point that's an obvious point. Bein lekula, bein lechumra, whether it results in a leniency or a stringency, that you need to have two witnesses per signature, and therefore, in the case that one witness died, it would be enough to have one outsider come to testify about each one of the signatures, and the living man, the surviving witness, could also, in addition to testifying about his own signature, he can join in testifying about the other one's signature. If there was an element of doubt in Rebbe's mind concerning Mona Shebishtarhe Me'idin, then you would have the problem of the deceased witness case Rebbe would then require 2 witnesses to testify about the deceased signature, and not allow the living man, the surviving witness, to testify about that deceased signature. Because if it was b'monish b'shtari meidim, then you know what would be if you don't have 2 outsiders concerning the deceased signature? You would have the surviving witness testify about his own signature. Right there, that represents 50% of the case. And the second signature of the deceased, if the living man participates in the testimony there, that's another 25% of the content being testified by one witness. The other 25% as a result of a singular outsider coming in, and that would be unacceptable, because when the Torah says that cases are established by 2 witnesses, the idea is that each witness carries on his shoulders only 50% of the burden and not any more. The Gemara goes on, Di Omar Rav Yehuda Marav Shnayim HaChasumim Al Ashtar Umeis Echad Mehen, 2 signers on a document and one of the signers died. Tzrichim Shnayim in Ashuk Lahoyed Olav. Rav Yehuda Marav says, according to the Chachamim, you'll have to have 2 outsiders testify about the deceased signature, even though the surviving signer might be able to authenticate that deceased signature. We won't allow him to do it. Bezu, in this case, that one of the 2 signers died, Rebbe Lekula v'Rabbanan Lechumra. Rebbe represents a lenient opinion. He'll tell you that all you need is to call in 1 person from the outside. The surviving witness, regarding his own signature, he can't function on his own. As we said before, Rebbe requires 2 witnesses per signature. So regarding his own signature, he's not functioning in total on his own. He needs that outsider. So between his own signature and the deceased signature, the living witness is not testifying of any more than a total of 50% of the document. So in that case, Rebbe would be Lekula, requiring only 1 outsider to come in, whereas the Rabbanon are Lechumra. They're going to require you to have 2 witnesses come to testify about the deceased man's signature, because as far as the Rabbanon are concerned regarding the surviving witness's signature, he doesn't need anyone else to testify about that. He can say, this is my signature, and that's it. And right there you've got 50% of the testimony taken care of by 1 man. To have that guy say anything about authenticating the deceased signature, he's already going over the 50% mark, and therefore the Rabbanan will tell you, we don't want the surviving witness to testify about the deceased signature whatsoever. And they therefore require 2 outsiders to testify about the deceased signature. The explanation we just gave is found in the Rashi. Rashi goes to some lengths to explain this in quite amount of detail. But for our purposes, our hope is that which we explained is sufficient. Rebbe and the Rabbanon, Rebbe saying that it's clear that in authenticating signatures, you require 2 witnesses per signature. And according to the Chachamim, when you come to authenticate a shtar, it's enough if the 2 signers are alive for each one to say about their own signatures, this is my signature. No need to bring in any outsiders. If, however, one of the signers dies, according to Rebbe, we'll assume for the time being that the surviving witness, in addition to recognizing his own, he also recognizes the deceased signature. But nevertheless, since Rebbe is of the opinion al ksav yodam heime'idim, even regarding his own signature, his own the surviving witness's own signature, his testimony is not enough. So he needs an outsider for his own signature as well. So you have 2 on his own signature. Hence, the surviving witness can also testify along with the outsider regarding the deceased signature. So according to Rebbe, in that case, all I'm calling upon is 1 outsider, whereas in that case, the Chachamim will need 2 outsiders to come to testify about the deceased signature. We continue in the Gemara. V'i leko trei elochad mai. Let us say that you don't have 2 outsiders that recognize the deceased signature. You have only one. You have only one outsider, and the surviving witness also recognizes the deceased signature. And we're working now within the opinion of the Chachamim. So if I have the surviving man plus one outsider, according to the Chachamim, the surviving man in potential is all that's necessary regarding his own signature. So what are we going to do now? I have the surviving man and I have one outsider that recognizes. What do we do? So now the Gemara answers, and you'll notice it's a long answer. One thing is for sure. In a case like that, where I have only one outsider, to allow the surviving man to testify about his own signature, and as far as the deceased signature, since you don't have the actual signer there, you're going to have 2 witnesses on the deceased signature. So to have the surviving witness join with the single outsider that recognizes the deceased signature, we're back to the problem of 3/4 of the testimony based on one of the witnesses, and that we can't allow. So what am I to do? Omar Abaye, lichtov chasimas yodei achaspa. The surviving witness should sign his name on a shard. V'shodi lei bebeidina v'chazulei, and then send it to the court, and they will look at it. Umachsiki lei beidina, and the court will verify the signature in the document from that which they see signed by this fellow on the chaspa. So the surviving witness's signature is verified, but through the court, through this method of signature comparison, the surviving man having nothing to do with the testimony on his own signature. He doesn't have to testify whatsoever on his own signature. The ozil ihu v'hai umisa di'aidoch. He, the surviving witness, and the single outsider can now join together to testify about the authenticity of the deceased signature. And the Gemara points out parenthetically, v'dafka chaspa, this eitzah, this advice, this method is true, but the recommendation is only on a shard should this signing take place. But for the surviving witness to demonstrate his signature on a formal piece of paper, document paper, megilta is a piece of parchment, a scroll, or whatever. It's the standard material for writing documents. We don't want him to simply sign his name on a blank piece of paper, let's say. On a shard is one thing. See, no one writes documents on shards. But on a blank piece of paper, don't just sign your name. Dilmo mishkachle inish dilo mali. A bad person might find it. Literally, inish, a man, dilo mali, that's not positive. For our purposes, we can say a lowlife might find that blank piece of paper with only your signature on it. Because of iluya maideboy, and he'll write above the signature, he'll write whatever he wants. He'll write I, the undersigned, hereby testify or acknowledge that I borrowed many thousands of dollars from so-and-so. And so-and-so then is going to bring the shtar to a court and show that the undersigned owes him money. Utnan, and we have a Tanaic source that says, Hoitzi olav ksav yodoi, shuchayav loi. If a person produces a document with someone's writing, someone's having written it out, or if you will, in this case, someone's signature on it, that he is chayav such and such amount of money. Here we're dealing with a document that has only the the indebted person's signature with a document without witnesses. So since it's a document without witnesses, you are allowed to collect from that individual's own currently held properties. That's b'nei chorin. That's what his property that he currently holds, as opposed to a case of a document that has formal witnesses written in it as well. That would enable the possessor of the document to collect from properties sold by the indebted individual as well. In other words, you can go to purchasers because we're assuming that the document you have has an earlier date in it than the subsequent sales the indebted individual may have made, thereby entitling you to a lien on those properties. So that's not the case over here. Here we're dealing with just his own signature in it, not without witnesses. But anyway, he still is exposing himself to an unfortunate situation where he could end up losing property just because he signed his name on a blank piece of paper that fell into the hands of some lowlife. Omar V'Yehuda Amar Shmuel Halacha Kedivrei Chachamim. Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, rules like the Chachamim, and well, that means everything that entails everything we said above. That the two witnesses, that when verification of signatures take place, in effect they're authenticating the content of the document, that the loan actually took place, or that the sale actually took place, and everything that follows suit, that if one of the witnesses dies, you're going to have two outsiders to testify concerning the deceased man's signature, etc. So Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel rules like the Chachamim. Pshita, is that not obvious? Yochid v'Rabim alocha karabim. Who argues on the Chachamim? An individual, that is Rebbe. So that when you have a majority opinion versus a minority opinion, we follow the majority opinion. That's par for the course of psak halacha, of ruling in the realm of Jewish law. So you follow the majority. So what does Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel add to our understanding of psak halacha by saying we follow the Chachamim? Mahu detema. Without Shmuel here, I would have thought halacha kirebi mechavero v'afilu mechaverov. Rebbe was a very great man. He was the leader of his generation, and in terms of rules of legal ruling, we follow Rebbe against any adversary, any single adversary of his. That's halacha kirebi mechavero. But I would have thought that rule extends even further, that we follow Rebbe because of his greatness even against a group that has a differing opinion. Chomash Malon, through Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, we see that we don't go that far. We might rule like Rebbe over an individual, but not over a group that disagrees with him. Simin Noch Nod Chad. This is a mnemonic device for a long list of names that we're going to now see in the next 3 lines of Gemara that lead up to a certain point. Omar Le Rav Chanina Bar Chia Rav Yehuda. V'Amrila, another version is Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Rav Yehuda. V'Amrila, another version, Rav Chia Bar Yehuda Rav Yehuda. Each one of these names is addressing Rav Yehuda, whichever version you choose, but you can see in each case they're addressing Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda, by the one, was the one that quoted Shmuel in ruling like the Chachamim, basically in disregarding the opinion of Rebbe. The Gemara asks a question, you'll notice it lasts a number of lines. Omi Omar Shmuel Hachi. Would Shmuel have ruled that the law is like the Chachamim, which means Almona Shebishtar He Me'idim, that the verifying witnesses are essentially are verifying the contents of the document. There was a document that had passed through the court of Shmuel, and the following text was found in this document. When Rav Onan came to testify about his own signature, and about the signature of someone, and the other signature in there, and that was Umanu. Who was that other one? Rav Chonan bar Rabba. Umidasa Rav Chonan bar Rabba v'asira chasimus yodei v'adachadi me Umanu Rav Onan bar Chia. And when Rav Chonan, the other gentleman from before, came to testify about his own signature and about the other one with him, Rav Onan, Ashranui v'kaimenui kidechozi. We then, in the court of Shmuel, we then authenticated and established this document as being authentic. Now, what do you see here in this story? You have a story taking place in Shmuel's court. Shmuel requiring the verification of the signatures, as we just described, where the signer himself testifies about his own signature and about the other one's signature. So at the end of the day, you've got two witnesses testifying about each signature. So from the fact that you have two witnesses testifying about each signature, that would reflect the opinion of Rabbi. According to the Chachamim, if you recall, it was enough for each witness that signed to say, this is my signature, and that's it. Each one about his own signature. No need for them to comment about the other signature. So what's going on with Shmuel over here? How can Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel say that we rule like the Chachamim when you see an incident in Shmuel's court reflecting Rabbi's opinion? Omar Lei, so the Rav Yehuda answers. After all, Rav Yehuda was presented with this question. So Rav Yehuda answers, Hahu Shtara Diyas Mahavi. The shtar in that particular story was a shtar, a document of Yisoimim. Yisoimim are orphans. So it's a document that represented something of benefit to the orphans. The Chosh Shmuel, the based in Toyin. And Shmuel was concerned about a court that's not familiar with the halacha. Based in Toyin is a court that makes mistakes. A court that thinks that the halacha, as the Gemara explains, the halacha follows Rebbe under all circumstances. The Sovar Shmuel figured, he calculated like this: Dilmo Ika, the Svirulei, there might be those that hold halacha kerebi mechavero, velo mechaverov, uvaha afilu mechaverov. That in general we know that the halacha follows Rebbe only against an individual adversary, but not against a majority. However, in this case, with regard to authenticating signatures, we follow Rebbe even against a majority opinion. Savar, so Shmuel figured, because someone might think like that in this kind of case, in the case of signature authenticating, you need two testimonies per signature. Savar, Shmuel figured, Avid Revacha, I'm going to do something a little more expansive than the letter of the law requires, and have two testimonies per signature, so that the Yisoimim, these orphans, don't end up losing out. So that I'm covering all tracks over here, I'm covering all my bases, making sure that if this document were ever to be produced in a court who thinks that we follow Rebbe all the time in cases of signature verification, if I would not have had each signature having two pieces of testimony on each one, these people would think then that the document is not sufficiently authenticated, and the Yisoimim, the orphans, would end up losing out. So I insisted on having each signature be subjected to the testimony of two witnesses. But if not for that, if you want to know the letter of the law, you don't need that. And that's what Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel originally stated when he paskined like the Chachamim. Omer Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. We have a new point, also brought to us by Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. On the side of the Gemara under the Nosei, the topic heading, Shtar Sheyesh Bo Henpik. a document that has a court certification in it. The court certifying that the signatures are authentic. And the creditor comes with this document to collect from the borrower. V'kora olav aror, and then suspicions were raised, challenges were raised regarding the document. Ma'u l'kaimoi al yedei echad min hadayonim ve'echad min hachoismin. In order to challenge the aror, to quiet the challengers, can we allow one of the judges that signed the court certification and one of the signers join up to serve as two witnesses to repudiate the aror? The Gemara. Omar of Yudam Shmuel, Aid v'dayon mitztarfen. A witness and a judge can join up. Before we go on, we take a look at Rashi, 3 lines from the end of the page. Aid v'dayon shtar shekosub bo henpik. A contract or a document that has a court certification written in it. V'chosmu hadayonim al henpik shaloi. And the judges signed their names on this court verification. And after a while, when the creditor produced the document in order to finally collect the debt owed to him, the borrower raised suspicions regarding the document, claiming it is a forgery. One of the signers, original witnesses that signed the document, came to testify that the signature in there is his own, is authentic. And one of the judges came to testify about his signature on the court verification. We have now two that join together to serve as a unit of testimony to authenticate or to repudiate the challenge of forgery. Before we continue, we have a new marking, a bow tie shape. Under the Mivneh heading, we indicate Litzor Kesher Im Ha Ba'omed Aleph, Ba'omed Beis. That is, we want to make a connection between that which we see here and that which we'll see on the next Omid. Omar Rami Bar Chama. Kamo Ma'al Yehosh Maitza. Rami Bar Chama is very impressed with this and says, how wonderful is this teaching. Omar Lei Rava. My Mal Yusa. What's so great about this teaching? In fact, there's a hole in it. My de komasid sada lo komasid dayona. My de komasid dayona lo komasid sada. First of all, in testimony, you need to have two witnesses that testify about the same thing. Two people that saw a loan took place. Two people that saw, lo aleinu, a murder take place. The two saw one event. In this case, you don't have the two testifying about the same thing. What the signer of the document, one of the original witnesses, he's signing about his signature, which was testimony concerning an event. We call that the mona shebishtar, the money, the content of the shtar, like the rabbanan. So that the witness that says, I recognize this as my signature, he verifies his own signature. He's justifying or verifying the event that took place as represented in the document. And the judge is testifying that they came in front of us for their signatures to be verified. The judge is not saying that we are witness to the actual loan or the event that took place. They're simply, the judges are testifying that the document had come for verification. So as the Gemara says, Rava says, you don't really have two witnesses on one thing. The one witness is testifying about one thing, the content of the shtar, and the judge is testifying about something else, that the shtar had been brought to them for verification. So how can you say Eid v'dayan mitzdarfen as Rami Bar Chama, as Rav Yehuda said, and Rami Bar Chama was so impressed with that? Ella, he also Rami Bar Yecheskel. Omar, Rami Bar Yecheskel happens to be the brother of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda, his name is presented without his father's name, but his father's name happened to be Yecheskel. His brother's name was Rami. So when Rami Bar Yecheskel came, Omar lo tatzisinu, to not heed or listen to lahani kloli, to the rules, the kayel Yehuda achi mishmei de Shmuel, that my brother Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel. In other words, disregard his ruling, namely Eid v'dayan mitzdarfen. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Iklo Ravnoi Achvo to Reb Chia bar Abba Lemizvan Shumshami. Ravnoi, the brother of Reb Chia, came for a transaction of sesame. The Omar, and he said, Hochi Omar Shmuel, Eid v'dayan mitzdarfen. Well, he quoted the original teaching of Shmuel, the teaching that Rav Yehuda quoted, that the Eid and Dayan do join up. Omar Amemar, Kamomaya Hashmaitza. And just like Rami Bar Chama on Omid Aleph said, so too you have here Amemar saying how wonderful a teaching that is. Omar le Ravashi la Amemar. Ravashi assumes the same position as Rava did on Amar Aleph, and he says to Amemar, Mishum de Kalsa Avua Dimoch, because your maternal grandfather, namely Rami Bar Chama, praised this teaching at Nami Mekalsis Law. You also feel obligated. You also feel the need to praise it. Kfar Parcha Rava. Rava already undid it. He pointed out that Al Mashazeh Meid, the other one is not Meid. Before going on into Gemara, we glance at the side, the topic heading. Shloisha dayonim, shnai mehem makirim hachasimos. You have three judges. A court is established by three judges. Shnai mehem makirim hachasimos. Two of the three recognize the signatures. Yecholim heim lohoyed b'fnei hashlishi. They can testify as two witnesses in front of the third judge. Ubekach yikaimu es hashtar. Now I have three judges that can verify the signatures. In other words, the third judge becomes aware of the authenticity of the signature of the signatures because he heard testimony from two of the judges. Omar of Safra, we continue in the Gemara. Omar of Safra, Omar Rabbi Abba, Omar of Yitzchak, Bar Shmuel, Bar Marta, Omar Rav Huna. V'yamrila, another version by way of names, Omar Rav Huna, Omar Rav. Shloisha shiyoshvu l'kayim es hashtar. Three that were seated as judges to verify or authenticate a document. And we're talking here about a case without the witnesses themselves coming to say that these are our signatures. Shnayim makirim chasimus yedeidim. Two of the three judges recognize these signatures as authentic. V'echad eino makir, and the third judge does not. And as we go on in the Gemara, we're going to have two versions or two stages in the presentation of this matter. And on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading, Roman numerals 1 and 2 are featured. Shnei shlovim beGemara, two stages in the Gemara. Lomar sheyesh lahakpid, that one has to be careful. Shelo yichtavu ubevadai shelo yechtamu al henpik shuchan merosh. We don't want to have these judges signing and we don't want them writing, and certainly not signing a court statement, a court verification shuchan merosh that was prepared ahead of time, because the text of this court verification says that the judges recognize the signatures. And if they don't all recognize it, mishum de merci keshikra, it looks like a lie. Rather, procedurally, first, before any court verification is written up, the third judge must hear the testimony of the first two judges that do recognize the signatures as authentic, the achar kach lochin as a handpick, and then afterwards prepare the text of the court verification. So we go back to the Gemara text, stage 1. This process of the two judges testifying in front of the third, the Gemara said, the beginning of line, there's a dashed underline expression, ad shelo chasmu, me'idin bifonov v'choisem. Before the two sign their names to the henpick. The henpick is the court verification. It's a text that's written into a shtar at the bottom of a shtar, where the judges describe the event of, the verification of the signatures. So before they sign their names, me'idin b'fonav v'choisem, they are to testify in front of the third of their colleagues, the third man that does not recognize the signatures. They testify that these are authentic signatures, and then they sign. However, mishachosmu, after the first two signed their names that they can testify, or they can authenticate the signatures, ein me'idim b'fonav v'chosim. They're not to then testify in front of the third one and then have him sign. The way things have been set up till now is that basically the whole text has already been prepared, and the hakpada in the Gemara, and this is what the Rav's halacha is that we don't want them signing, we don't want the two of them that do recognize the signature signing before they issue their testimony in front of the third. Now the Gemara asks, Mi kasvinon, do we even write the handpick, or we call the asharsa? The asharsa is the court verification. Do we even write it up before the testimony in front of the third took place? The Amar Rav Papi Mishmei de Rava. Rav Papi, in the name of Rava, says, Hay asharsa de daini de nichtiv mikame de nechvu sadi achsimus yadayu. A court verification that is written out before the nechfu sadi, means before the witnesses authenticate their signatures, psula, that court verification will be unfit, the mischazi kishikra, that would appear to be a lie. Now that particular case is dealing with a situation where the witnesses themselves are going to authenticate their signatures. Well, hachanami, so too over here, in our case of the two judges that recognize the signatures, the third not, if the two are going to, if you're going to have the text written out before all three can verify the signature, hachanami mischazi keshikra, appears to be a lie, because the text itself says, and Rashi quotes this, the text itself says, we were three judges that have become familiar or are aware of the authenticity of these signatures. How can you write the three of us are aware of the authenticity of the signatures when they're not yet aware? So we don't want even the text to be written out, let alone having them sign it before all three are aware. Elo Ema, rather state as follows. The stage 2 now in stating the halacha, as we saw above, Rav's halacha is as follows. Ad shelo kosvu me'idim b'fonav v'choisem. Before the text of the verification of the court is even written up, the two judges testify in front of the third, and then the signing. Misha kosvu ein me'idim b'fonav v'choisem. However, once the text is written up, it's too late. They can't testify in front of the third judge and have them then sign the court verification. From this story the two judges recognizing, and then they're testifying in front of the third. Shma mino tlas. We can draw three conclusions, and we've used triangles to highlight each one of them. On the side of the Gemara, you see a triangle featured. Shma mino tlas mehad yamrinon dishnei dayonim yaidu b'fnei hashlishi v'yachdamu. From this incident, we draw three conclusions. Number one, Shma mino eid na sedayan. A witness can also serve as the judge. What do we see here? We have the two of them that recognize the signatures are testifying about the signatures, and then they themselves end up signing it as court verifiers, meaning as in demonstrating a position or in the position of being judges. So they were witnesses, and the very same people then put on their hat as a judge. We also conclude from here that judges that recognize signatures of witnesses, einon tzrichim lahoid bifnehem. There is no need for the witnesses to testify in front of them. Ushma mina, and we also conclude from here, dayanim shein makirin chasimus yedei edim. If you have three judges that don't recognize the witnesses, tzrichin lahoid b'fnei kol echad ve'echad. The witnesses have to testify in front of each one of the judges. In other words, if they testified in front of two of the judges, the third one won't be able to sign. Because in this case, when they don't recognize the signatures, we required, we should say, as we saw in our case, the third judge who didn't recognize the signatures had to hear testimony from the two, so that when you have a judge that doesn't recognize the signatures, each one has to hear the testimony of the signers. So we saw three conclusions drawn from the above case. Maskiflo Rav Ashi. We start a long question over here in this. The Gemara is highly structured. So let us point out, before we get into the text, the structure of the Gemara. First of all, we had three triangles, and each one was numbered 1, 2, and 3. Rav Ashi, as the long question begins, Rav Ashi will challenge two of the 3 points, and then later, you'll see as the long question goes on, a number 2, Rav Papa comes to challenge a third point. The marking is explained on the side, the double underline. These are nisyonos lidchois kol echad me'ashma mino d'liel. When you see the double underline, the Gemara will be challenging one of the conclusions that was referred to before in a triangle. Now, procedurally, though, it's not going to follow the same order of 1, 2, 3. Rather, the challenges will be 2, 3, and then 1. The numbers that we have in the Gemara text as we can continue correspond to the numbers in the triangles above. So we continue now with a long challenge. Maskiflo Rav Ashi. Bishlomo Eidna Sedayan Shaminon Mina. And by the way, this point that Rav Ashi says, yeah, that we can conclude Eidna Sedayan. If you were to skip down to the final double underline, where Rav Safra comes into the picture, he quotes a Tanaic source. If you skip to the end of that, after the Tanaic source, V'Isalka Daitach Deidna Sedayan, then if that were true, then the information in the source would be problematic. We're going to bring that into question also. But in the meantime, Rav Ashi says, all right, look, Bishlam Eidna Sedayan Shamina Mina. That we can conclude that a witness he'll wear the hat of a witness, and then right after that put on the hat of a judge. Meaning, he was functioning as a witness, can turn into a judge. That Shamina Mina we conclude from above. Ella Dayanim Hamakirim Hasimus Yedei Eidim Ein Tzrichin Lahoid Bifneim. As far as concluding what we did in triangle number 2, that judges who recognize the signatures as authentic, there's no need for testimony to be made in front of them. Dilma li'olam ein malach tzrichin. I'll tell you that in general, it's very nice that the judges recognize the signatures, but you still need to have formal testimony made in front of them. V'shayni hacha, in the case mentioned above, the two that recognized and the third that didn't, we fulfilled the requirement of having testimony made in front of that single judge, that third judge that did not recognize. So, as far as court formality is concerned, you do have to have the presence of a form of testimony. So that if let us say you have all three judges recognize the signatures, that would not be enough. You'd have to have formal testimony taking place in front of them. In this case, we have a situation of formal testimony in the form of the two judges testifying to the third. Point number 3 in the triangle above: V'dayonin she'ein makirin chasimus yedei edim tzrichin lahoyed b'fnei kol echad ve'echad. Judges that do not recognize signatures, there must be testimony in front of each one of them. I might tell you that you don't have to have testimony in front of each one of them. For shiny hacha, in the case above, there was testimony. If there wasn't testimony in front of the third judge, you would have had no testimony whatsoever. But to go from a conclusion that you need to have testimony in front of each one from the case above, that you can't conclude. As far as the testimony in the case above, that was to fulfill the basic requirement of having some testimony. So just to go over this last point again, the thought was that dayanim who don't recognize the signatures, you'll have to have testimony in front of each one of them. And it would not have been enough to have testimony in front of two of them, and they would then inform the third one. There's a Rashi that we ought to look at together on that point, about halfway down. Tzrichin lahoyed b'fnei kol echad ve'echad shemeidu b'fnei hashnayim ein hashlishi yochol lachtoim. If the testimony had been made only in front of two of them, the third judge cannot sign. And again, we're dealing with a case of judges that did not recognize these signatures. If testimony had been made in front of two of them, the third one won't be able to sign. Because in the case we had above, we saw that the two judges who did recognize the signatures still needed to testify in front of the third. The Gemara then rejected that by saying that the fact that above there was the need for testimony in front of the third was simply because without that there would have been no formal testimony been made in front of the judges whatsoever. But to go from that to say that each judge has to have formal testimony made in front of them, that is not so. Yosef Rabbi Abba v'ka'omar lo lahosh maitzodei na sedayan. As you recall, number 1 above in the triangle, we saw that the fellows, the judges, 2 of whom served as witnesses in front of their third colleague, they then turned around and signed as judges verifying the document. We concluded from that aid na'asedayan, a witness can convert into being a judge. Eisvei Rav Safra the Rebbe Abba. Rav Safra raises an objection to that. The source that we're about to learn concerns the topic of Eidus HaChodesh. Eidus HaChodesh involves the establishing of a new month, and that's established by 2 witnesses noticing the new lunar crescent representing the beginning of a new month. They come and testify to the Beis Din that they saw the new lunar phase, and the court thereby sanctifies the new month. In this source we continue, Ra'uhu shloisha v'hein Beis Din. 3 members of the High Court saw the new phase. Yamdu shnayim v'yoshivu mechavereim eitzel hayochid v'yoidu b'fnehem. 2 of the 3 judges, members of the High Court that are necessary for establishing the new month, 2 of them stand up and serve as witnesses. And they testify in front of whom? In front of the 3rd one, plus 2 others. It says, V'yoshivu mechavereim. They have to have 2 others seated, Eitzel Yochid, by the 3rd one that did see it. V'yoidu b'fnehem, v'yomru. They testify in front of them. V'yomru means, and those 3 that are sitting listening to this testimony will then say, Mekudesh HaChodesh, Mekudash. The new month is sanctified. Shein HaYochid Ne'emon Al Yedei Atzmo. To have that 3rd judge that saw the new lunar phase on his own wouldn't be enough. What do we see though in this case? We saw that the 2 judges that served as, that witnessed the new lunar phase, they remain witnesses. They themselves don't function as judges. If that were so, that he who serves as a witness can also serve as a judge, Lomali kulehai. Why is all of this necessary? They're having to have 2 others join the 3rd. Lisvu beduchtayu velikdashi. After they the 2 testified in front of the 3rd, let them sit down in their place. Lisvu, let them sit where they are and sanctify. Why the need for bringing 2 others? It would therefore appear from this source that we challenge the conclusion of Eid Na'aseh. Omar Lei. So Rabbi Abba, after hearing Rav Safra's question, he responds, Af ledidi kashili. This was actually a difficulty for me too. In other words, I am aware of this source, and it seems to be a problem for concluding Eid Na'aseh V'shaltei l'Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Mata, and I presented this difficulty to Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak l'Rav Huna, Rav Huna l'Chio bar Rav, v'Chio bar Rav l'Rav. It went up the ladder. Eventually, the question had been presented to Rav, Yomar Lahu, and Rav answers, Hanoch li'edus hachodesh d'oraisa v'kiyum shtoros d'Rabbanan. Leave aside the case of Eidus HaChodesh, that's the testimony concerning the new month. That is testimony required on a Torah level. And when you have something required from the Torah, we can't allow for Eid Na'aseh Dayan, for an aid, a witness to become a judge. However, the issue concerning Kiyum Shtoros, verifying signatures and documents, the idea of being able to challenge a signed document and require further verification, that is a rabbinic requirement. So in that case, we have more flexibility, and we can say Eid Na'aseh Dayan. Before we continue in the Gemara, let us glance at the side under our Nosei, our topic heading, which reads, Gimel Sheyoshvu L'Kayim Es Hashtar. 3 judges sat down to authenticate a document. V'kor arur al echad mehem, and the trustworthiness of one of them was brought into question, was challenged. Can the 2 others, the 2 of his colleagues, the 2 others, testify about his acceptability? In other words, to repudiate the aror, the challenge. The Gemara. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Shloisha sheyoshvu l'kayim es hashtar. 3 judges that sat to verify a document. V'kor aru al echad mehem. and aspersions were cast against one of them. Ad shelo chosmu me'idim alav v'chaismein. If the two had not signed the document yet, so prior to their signing the court verification, they testify about the third one and then sign. Mishechosmu ein me'idim alav v'chaismein. However, once they have signed already, they cannot testify about his honesty anymore. They can't machshir him anymore, or they can't. They're not believed to. Their testimony is not accepted to rebuff the challenge. The Rashi says, "Mishechosmu." Once they have signed, havlu noigim be'edus. They have a vested interest in his being kosher. Shignai lohem shiyoshvu imposul bedin. It is to their detriment, it is to their embarrassment, negative to them, that they would have sat together with a judge that's unqualified to serve as such. The Gemara wants to analyze the circumstances of this halacha further. Aror demai, when we say the third judge was being challenged, well, with regard to what? I aror de gazlanusa, if the voices of doubt, the aspersions that were being cast were of his being a thief. So you have, let us say, two people testifying that he's a thief, and these two judges saying that he's not a thief. Trey, utrey, ninu. It's then in effect 2 against 2, so that their testimony wouldn't be effective in being machshir him. Their testimony, his colleague's testimony, would not be effective in establishing his acceptability. If it's a challenge concerning his pedigree, pagam mishpacha, Rashi says, sheidu alav shu'eved. The challengers came testifying that he's a slave, and a slave is unfit for serving as a judge. If that were the case, then gilui milsa bi'almahu, the acceptance of him based on their testimony would be okay, even if they testified after they signed. The issue here is a question of pre-established facts, and they're simply revealing that which was already, or that which already could have been known. Rashi explains, Gilui milsa bi'amu, after they already signed, why can't they testify about him? What concern or suspicion of having a vested interest is there in this case? The matter of his being a slave or not is something subject to scrutiny. Something of this nature is something that is subject to investigation, something that can become clarified later. The ability of these judges to function as verifiers is not dependent on what they say. When the two judges come and say that he is not a slave, they're simply revealing a pre-established fact. That's not dependent on their word, it's dependent on the facts that existed. They're simply revealing the pre-established facts. They're not establishing a new status, or a status is not being established by their word per se. So therefore, if it's that type of irur, if the challenge regarding the third judge is one of Pegam Mishpacha, then they could have already signed and still testify about their third colleague as being kosher. We'll go back to the first approach, that the challenge regarding the acceptability of the third judge as being kosher was that his honesty was being challenged. In other words, he was being charged through their testimony, as a thief. And a thief cannot serve as a judge. The question then is, why are you going to believe the two colleagues of his that say he's not? Is it not 2 against 2 and they cancel each other out? The Ko'amri Hani, the two colleagues, are saying, Yadinon Bey De'ovat Shuva. Yeah, we're not disagreeing. There's no contradiction in testimony here. But we have additional information. We know that he also repented. He returned the stolen item. And that's why they are believed, simply because, and there is no contradiction in the testimony. There's no it's not a case of 2 against 2. However, as we said before, for us to accept their testimony that he returned the item already, that's only if they hadn't signed already. But once they signed, we can't trust their information, because they have a vested interest in not being viewed as those that sat with a wicked individual on the same court. Before we continue in the Gemara, we glance at the side. We have a topic heading Nosei. 3 judges that sat to verify a document. And one of the 3 died before they signed their names. How do we formulate the text of the court verification? The Gemara. Omar Rabbi Zera, Ha Milsa me Rabbi Abba Shmieli. The following I heard from Rabbi Abba, V'ilav Rabbi Abba de ben Akko Shachachta. And if not for another Rav, his name was Rabbi Abba from Akko, if not for him, says Rabbi Zera, I would have forgotten this. And here it is. Gimel, or Shlosha Shiyashvu L'Kaimas Ashtar, 3 judges that sat to verify a document. Umeis Echod Mehem. And just before the signing, one of them keeled over and died. Tzrichin lemichtav. They have to write the following. B'moisav tlasa havina, we were a group of 3 that were seated. V'chad leisoin, one is no longer. In other words, we have testimony here that the signatures were approved by a court of 3. If you see only 2 signers, that isn't because there weren't 3 initially. There were 3. Omar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, v'ikosavei, if the following text appears, Shtara denon nofak lekadmin beidina, this document was presented to a court. Sulo tzorech, you don't have to record anymore. Why? Because by saying beidina, you are acknowledging that there were 3. The Gemara asks, V'dilma based in Chotzavhu Chadeshmuel. Maybe it was a partial court, which Shmuel says is okay. Diomar Shmuel Shnaim Shidonu Dineim Din. 2 that issue a ruling as judges, their ruling stands. Ela Shenikra based in Chotzav. Just that it's called by that term, based in Chotzav. For our purposes, without a literal translation, it would mean a broken or partial based in, but enough to render a decision. So that by recording in the document that this shtar was presented to a based in, and we're to understand that it was presented to 3, not necessarily so. Maybe they thought like Shmuel. And I should add, but not that we agree with Shmuel. So that by having 2, for our purposes, that would not be enough. The Gemara continues. Dichtiv Bey, what the alternative text that we're willing to accept, right, is written as follows: Beidino de Rav Naashi. Namely, if you go to the quote that we had 3 lines above, Shtora Dinon Nofak Likadmino Beidino de Rav Naashi, that this document was presented to the court of Rav Ashi. And that is designed to establish that there were definitely 3 there originally. The Gemara says, who says? V'dilma Rabbonon debei Rav Ashi k'dishmul sviralahu. Maybe the students of Rav Ashi hold like Shmuel, that 2 are enough. And again, we don't hold by that. So just by saying that this document was presented to Beidina de Rav Naashi, that doesn't mean that there were 3 that we do require. The Gemara says, Dichsiv Bey v'omar lona Rav Naashi, and Rav Ashi instructed us. So Rav Ashi himself, he requires 3, and he instructed us to approve the document. Therefore, if you have a statement like that, you don't need to have any further indication that there were 3 present and simply that 1 is no longer there. It's obvious to us that if you write this text in, that Rav Ashi instructed us to verify the document, that would be enough.